Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm your host, Mark Graven. Our guest today is Anne Frewin. She describes herself as a seasoned Lean leader with over 12 years of experience applying Lean in settings including healthcare, laboratories, and manufacturing. Her primary goal is to help organizations close gaps in safety, quality, delivery, financials, and people by coaching leadership and frontline employees to be relentless problem solvers. She does this by developing people in lean thinking and motivating them through hands-on coaching. So Anne, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Mark. I'm great today. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. I'm always happy when SQDC, or in this case, SQFC, I'm happy when, or SQDFP, by mistake. I'm glad when safety and quality are at the forefront of the approach in the conversation. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Even though I got some letters wrong, this is not my favorite mistake, but I'm just demonstrating yet again we're all mistake makers. But thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Isn't that the Shingo easier, better, faster, cheaper? Did I get that one right?
Easier, better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Safety, quality, delivery, cost.
And I shared that online the other day, and somebody pushed back, rightfully so. Well, like, why isn't safety at the front of that list? And like, I'm all for it. I mean, I think if an organization, honest to goodness, makes safety really the first priority, maybe they don't have to state it, but why take that risk, I figure.
Right. I agree. Safety should be forefront, should be in everything that we do, right? I'm jumping forward, but that's motion waste right there, right? Motion waste is to make things safer, easier, safer. Yeah.
For sure. So maybe we will come back and we can talk more about that. But I like to start off, with, if I have a standard question, I'm always curious about people's origin story. Where and how and why and when, and how'd you get exposed to this, Anne, and why did it resonate with you?
Yeah, I have a great story. I think I have a great story.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a background in finance. So I spent most of my first part of my career in financial planning and analysis at a bank, which I don't do banking anymore, but that's where most of my training was at. And so I really kind of slipped into process improvement world while I was in healthcare. So I had actually gotten a master's in healthcare administration right out of college. I was going to go change the world of nursing homes. And that didn't last very long. I had a rude awakening of how nursing homes really work, and decided that I'd go work with numbers instead of people to get some better experience. And so after a while, I was in financial planning analysis for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And then I've moved out to Maine from Minnesota. I moved from Maine to get warmer because Minnesota's so doggone cold. And so I was working at a hospital system as senior financial analyst. And when I was hired on, they hired on the same day as me, sat next to me in the orientation, a guy who was going to be the process improvement specialist. I don't remember what his title was exactly. And I had no idea what that was. Like, tell me about that. So he was telling me about it. And I ended up being the metrics person for all of their improvement work. They were rolling out A3s, doing a lot of very great stuff initially. And so I provided them with data, with the metrics. I was in some of the projects with them. And then after a year, the company hired on a director of process improvement. This guy was great. He had 30 years of experience. He was an industrial engineer, master black belt. I always joke he had all the bells and whistles. Fantastic guy, became one of my best friends. And he really introduced the hospital to what a lean operating system is. And he created a training program called Central Maine Operating System. We called it CMOS affectionately. I was in the first cohort of that. I helped them develop it. So I was really learning everything from him. And I joke because he was one of those senseis that kept asking me why. And I I remember sitting outside a coffee shop one day with him, and I was like, would you stop asking me why? Just tell me what you want me to do. but he didn't. He kept asking me why. And eventually I caught on. But so I was working with him for a couple of years and really starting to understand that what process improvement was. At the same time, we were rolling out a benchmarking program called Action OI. And so I was working with the Action OI group from Truven Health as far as like learning about process improvement and tying in the metrics that way as well. So I was kind of getting it on both sides. It was, I've read Katie Anderson's book, right? With the, I think it's warps and wefts, right? And I'm like, that's exactly my life. Like I look back and see how these things kind of came together. And so after a couple of years, I was really getting tired of finance. I wanted to change. I've been talking with the CEO about what else could I do. About that time, the director of process improvement decided to leave the organization. His wife had never moved from Pennsylvania, so he was going to go back to her. And so I walked up to my CEO and I said, I think I can do his job. Now, he had all that experience, and I had 2 years of him asking me why all the time. So to the CEO's credit, he said, yeah, let's try it. And I really never looked back. And the president of the hospital said to me one day, he goes, I've never seen you happier. And I said, I finally think I found what I should be doing. So I took on that department there, which was at the time 1 person. I grew it to 3, and I haven't ever looked back, and I love it. I really enjoy, I get to use my finance, my metrics background. I get to work with people. It's best of both worlds.
Yeah. So sometimes the leading by questions can be a bit much. I get pushback on that. And, I think, asking a lot of questions, in particular, why is useful. Sometimes a statement is appropriate instead of a question. But I mean, would you say, looking back at it, did the whys develop you more in those 2 years than if he had been more directive?
For me, it did. It really forced me to think, right? That's what he was doing, right? He was forcing me to think differently, not just to take things at face value. And, it wasn't easy. And I'm sure there were days where he finally just told me what to do. But, and I find that too, there's many times that I keep just asking questions. Sometimes it drives people crazy, but the end game is the thinking, right? It's the critical thinking skills we're trying to develop in people. And the more that you're told what to do, the less you're going to be able to sustain things and understand the why behind it, right? All of that. But yeah, it did drive me crazy, but it did force me to think differently. And I think that's why when I took the role over, I was better in the role, because I had been challenged to think, to understand what he was trying to do, not just the end game, but the process of getting there.
Yeah. And you mentioned one thing I wanted to follow up on. You mentioned the idea of a lean operating system. I mean, how would you describe to an executive who said, well, I've heard of, lean and maybe people do projects or we certify people, but I don't know what's an operating system. What did that mean in that setting, or what do you think it should mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think sometimes we just take it for granted, right? What it is. But I was trying to explain this to somebody earlier today, actually, that it's not just about going out and doing projects. It's not just about trying to get the results through problem solving. It's about setting up the systems and structures in place in the organization so that it's sustainable and so that it's driving the culture that we need, which for me is a culture of relentless problem solvers, as you said in the introduction, right? Continuously improving, culture that drives respect for people. So it's really about what are the systems we have in place to ensure that people are learning, developing, driving that continuous improvement culture. And it's not just, we're not just going to go out and do a project and fix what was broken, because we can fix what's broken, it's going to break again, or another part of it's going to break. But if we have the underlying systems and structures, which to me looks like an idea system, a recognition system, it looks like some sort of problem-solving methodology. I lean towards A3 thinking, maybe doing some rapid improvement events or Kaizens or whatever the word is you wanted to develop that continuous improvement. So teaching them fundamentals, culture, and then setting up the systems to carry it.
And you mentioned respect for people, and we're talking about establishing systems. That makes me think of a mutual friend of ours who was a guest recently, Scott Galvin, who talked about the difference between respecting people and respect for people. And encourage people to find that recent episode with Scott, because I think there's a difference between how we behave and establishing systems. I mean, there's a, would you say, I mean, there's kind of a deeper level of leadership activity to help put systems like that in place that help ensure, I don't know if ensure is the right word, but make it more likely that people are being respected.
Yeah, I think that the systems have to be in place in order to be able to have the respect for people, right? And I love that distinction between respecting. Respecting is kind of I forget how he described it, but for me, it's a passive. It's I can respect people, but if I have respect for people, then I have to be actively following that up with my actions, right? And so, to me, one of the things I love is a really solid, good idea system.
Yeah.
And to me, an idea system embodies what respect for people is. It's telling your front line, hey, we respect your thoughts. We respect the work best and how you can make it better. And so if we can put a really strong idea system in place that grabs those ideas and not only implements them, but the people who had the idea get to implement it. So it's not going up to management. It's not a electronic system that falls into a black hole, right? It's an active. That to me is your first show of respect for people, is by asking them what bugs you and what would you do to fix that.
Yeah.
And just those questions start to open that up, and people start to feel that respect because they're actually getting to own the idea that they had. And so I feel like that's one perfect example of the systems that have to be in place if you want to show that respect for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I'm going to paraphrase maybe a little differently of, looking at Scott's differentiation between those words, that I could treat you respectfully. So we could say, I respect people. I want your ideas. Someone could present an idea and I could react in a respectful way. Like, for example, the worst case scenario would be a leader saying something like, well, that's a dumb idea. Okay, well, you're not respecting the person. Yep. You're not acting respectfully. But I love how I think you threw the word effective idea system in there, or strong idea system, like one that's actually a system and not a suggestion box black hole. Because we could act respectfully, but then ultimately, if people's ideas lead to nothing, that's not a respect for people.
Correct.
There's not a system there to ensure, or at least make much more likely, that ideas are followed up on. Right.
Right. The worst I've come across is when you have I know one organization, I won't name them, but I know one organization where an electronic idea system is actually working, but they've got a really strong culture there. But most of the times, if there's an electronic system, it's going up to a management team that has to decide if something was a good idea or not, right? And at the end of the day, one of my favorite, I have a couple of good examples that are small, but one of my favorite recently was there was a woman who needed to reach up to cut something. I forget what it was, something up here, part of the process. She was stretching and she said, I just need a step stool. And she wanted a step stool so she could reach and not stretch. And she'd asked for it, but nothing had ever been done until we put the idea system in place.
Yeah.
And suddenly the team was like, yeah, we need that. That's a great idea. Let's get that. And suddenly it was there, right? So it's not big. It's not these big engineering changes or management changes. It's just the small, I need scissors at stations, or I need a step stool, or, what's important to them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered the question you asked.
No, that is. No, I think that's a good example. And, it's not like somebody's having to reach up too high. That sounds like an ergonomic issue. And, I think, part of respect for people comes back to starting with safety. If we really, to demonstrate respect for people, we want a process that has safety designed in, right? So when you think about the reach, right? I don't mean to jump in and micromanage here, but I think of a situation where, well, does the step stool create a different safety risk?
Yes.
Is there like, is the ultimate, the goal? And I think this is where like collaborative coaching comes into effect. I don't think it's disrespectful if somebody were to say, I need a step stool. I don't think it's disrespectful to say, well, thank you for bringing that up. And boy, we need to eliminate the ergonomic risk. Like maybe try to restate the problem where we find, a solution. How can we design the work so it works for taller people and shorter people?
Yep.
At the same time, right?
And that goes back to the convent of it being a system, right?
Yeah.
And being an effective system, because it's not like we're going to go put an idea board up and here's a card and go fill it out and good luck. It's as a continuous improvement practitioner, I am there, or somebody on my team is there with the people leading the board, with the team, coaching them on not even, how to use the board, but what are some of the coaching questions for the leader to ask, or even the team members when they finally take over and run the idea board. What are those coaching questions? To your point, hey, that's a great idea. You're right. That is an ergonomic issue. I'm a little, let's get a step stool in the short term, but what else could we do to help that, to fix that problem? What are some other ideas? Or, we rolled it out and the boards were too high, but they couldn't come down. But somebody put on the board, lower the board.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it needs to be lowered. But are there other ideas? And it was fascinating because as I asked that question, I'm like, are there other ideas? Is there something else we could do? And one of the operators said, hey, it's a square board, because it was on a whiteboard. Could you get something that's long? Could we have a long board?
Yeah.
And then we could all reach it. And I was like, that's exactly the thinking we're looking for, right? It was so, even first day, to start having them think of outside the box, different ways. And that's what makes that system work, is when you start to coach them to, it's not that the idea is the end point. The idea is maybe a stepping off place to somewhere else. But continuing to develop them and coach them to think that way. And what could we try? One of the organizations I worked with taught me 3 questions for idea system. Like, is it safe? So that's the first question that you have to ask. Is it safe to the employee and to the customer? Does everybody who needs to know? And can it be undone? And so if you can answer yes to those 3 questions, then that falls into then let's try it, right? So if that step stool wasn't safe, then okay, what could we do differently, right? That's how that tends to follow. So, but that's what makes up the system, all of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've navigated, especially I think when you're getting started with Kaizen or, improvement and employee engagement. I agree with what you said about, an ideal state. If you have an idea, you're able to work on it. You're able to experiment. You're able to try things and iterate. But sometimes that freaks people out, where like, if I raise an idea, I'm going to have more to do. And, so I'm curious, like, some of your experiences in navigating this balance between, well, sure, we want to keep decision-making at the work is, as close to the front lines as we can. But then there's times when leaders do need to jump in and help or coach or be a servant leader. I'm curious, your thoughts or your story about, finding that balance.
Yeah, the balance, it's definitely a balance. And there are definitely times where there isn't time. We need engineering's help. We need maybe IT's help. Sometimes, right, I'll just say those are going to take longer. Is there a solution without them that we could try first? But it goes back to the alignment with strategy, or it doesn't go back to, because we haven't talked about it, but that's to me where it goes to, is what's the alignment, the strategy? What is the ultimate why as to why we're doing this, right? One is employee engagement, but how is that going to help relieve some of the time and the energy that the managers are doing for other things, right? And how can we show that connection to, hey, if you help them with this, you're actually not going to need to run that major project that you want to run, or you're going to run it, but maybe it's going to go faster because you're giving frontline some opportunity. Or it's just learning to prioritize, right? I've used the 2x2 a lot, benefit effort matrix. Everybody calls it something different, right? The benefit effort matrix.
I've heard it called the pick chart or different things. Yeah.
Right. And so then it's, okay, what's the benefit of, right? What's the impact we're trying to have? So, and where does it fall on that that scale, and that helps people also realize the quick wins, those are the ones we can just go do, right, versus the ones that are going to take longer. So if we get to a point where we're starting to feel like things are taking too long or the ideas are too big, then I go to that 2x2 and we put it up there and let that dictate what we're going to work on. But the whole key of that is that keeping the communication and the feedback loop back to the operators or the front line, right? Because if they have an idea, but it's got to go, it's a bigger project or it's going to take longer. We can't just say, thank you for your idea, take the card off the board and walk away. So there's a long-term section on the board. We put it in there and, you name what's going on, where it's at. So people still know it's being worked on. It hasn't been forgotten. But it's being worked by somebody else. And there's a line to make sure that there's a carry through, right? There's that accountability and the follow through, and then the feedback loop back to the front line to say, this is still important. It hasn't been forgotten.
Yeah. And I think in that category of finding the balance, I think another thing that's challenging, especially at first, is helping people think through like what type of problem or situation is big enough to merit a rapid improvement event / Kaizen event, wherever we call it, versus like when do we need that week or however many days it is, or when can we just, I don't like to say just do it. I like to say just PDSA it, as you were describing, try something, evaluate it, it's not always obvious sometimes, in my experience, in a way of like, sometimes something really big maybe actually has a small countermeasure we could just go test. And sometimes something that seems relatively trivial has a deeper root cause that we don't understand. Like, how do you help people navigate kind of like which style of PDSA? I'll throw A3s in there as well, because you brought that up.
Yeah. There you go. There's another system, right? It's the problem solving system.
Yeah.
When do you take what tool out of your toolbox? And I find that PDSA, I say PDSA, PDCA, I've done PDSA. I like that better too. To me, that's foundation to everything, right? Everything we do, whether it's putting an idea board, a Gemma board up, running a big project, you have to follow PDSA. And then I've done a lot with A3s where I've had people in my organization go, but what if it's smaller than an A3? I'm like, well, why does it have to be smaller than an A3, right? It's just the complexity is different, but the thinking is still the same to some degree. So to answer your question, for me, it's first and foremost, if it's just within the area itself, it's not cross-functional. I say I call it, let's try it, right? If it meets my 3 questions, let's try it. Usually there's not a big metric we're trying to affect. It's just a safety issue or makes it easier. People are happier. As we start to branch out and things become more cross-functional, now we're talking about Kaizen or, an event or an A3. And then that becomes the priority and how quickly do we need to change, right? So I find a good solid A3, if you really give it the dedication and it needs and the coaching it needs, it's going to take 3 to 5 months. I like to use an A3 when I'm really coaching somebody through the thinking process, teaching them how to think through a structured problem solving methodology. I want to have the A3. I want to have weekly coaching sessions with the learner. I want the sponsor to be involved, right? To me, it's more of a development and training thing. The short-term event is when we've got a project, we need to fix it, and we need to fix it now. We know it's a short, it's cross-functional, but we believe if we get everybody in a room for 3 days, we'll come out of there with really solid action plans that tie back to root cause. Right? Not just a wish list and pet project of people, but really has its foundation in the process and the things that are happening, right? So that's the event comes when you need it done. You need it done quickly, or B, it can be done quickly. And there doesn't need to be this learning development piece to it.
Yeah. And those 3 questions again, is it safe? Remind the second one. I'm sorry. I want to restate this for people.
Is it safe? Does everybody who need to know, and can it be undone?
Okay. So have we engaged all the right people?
Correct.
that
If
second
it's
question.
multi-shifts, do all the 3 shifts know? If people down, I like to say, make sure people downstream know,
Hmm.
right? Because you could make a change, and if people downstream don't know it happened, it could affect them. So do they know that
Yeah.
this change is happening?
Yeah.
Or upstream, you make a change and suddenly you need different information from the people upstream of you, but they better know you need that information.
Yeah.
Don't make any assumptions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes that's the iterative nature. It's probably best to err on the side of checking upstream, checking downstream. Sometimes that's a mistake that we learn from and work through. And
Correct.
hopefully in the future, people learn by doing that. Oh, okay, well, this problem solving was slower and we actually created a new problem because we didn't check downstream. That'll reinforce the need to do that going forward. Because I mean, healthcare, I'd be curious to hear, if you've got thoughts or stories about, breaking down the silos. I think that's just such a challenge in healthcare. Even if you look at like the flow of a tube of blood going from the doctor's order to the blood draw in the emergency department to the lab, like there are multiple professions and departments involved in that. And I've
Right.
seen just these disconnects that are pretty easily solvable when you get people walking the whole process. I'm curious what examples come to mind, for you.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples was I was working with uh, gosh, I can't remember even the department it was. It wasn't a cardiology. Anyway, they were, so this was back in when I was working in healthcare, right? And the problem was, it was one of those things where patients show up at 6 o'clock in the morning. The surgery is at 9, but the
Hmm.
doctor, the surgeries weren't starting on time. I think they had like a 40% on time rate. Um, and so the nurses wanted to point fingers at a certain provider that he was a
Hmm.
problem.
Hmm.
Um, and the doctors wanted to point the fingers back at the staff that was getting the patients ready, that they were the problem.
Hmm.
Right. And so it was more of, we brought people in the room, and there definitely was some outlying issues going on. But it was one of my favorite times where we did do more of a Kaizen. We brought
Hmm.
everybody in the room. There was, I believe, one provider in the room. One provider didn't show up. Um, but we worked together, and we started to map the process backwards. We started with, what time does the surgery need to start?
Yeah.
And then what do we need to do? Like, we did a backwards process map
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah.
And how much time does it take today, and how much time
Hmm.
do you need to have? And so there was a lot of aha moments in that. And I remember look backing, I believe it was, we had the schedulers, we had the nurses, we had the techs, and we had at least one provider. Um, and they went through the 3 days, and they came out with a plan that would work for everybody. And looking back, and this was, gosh, 10 years ago, so I don't remember all of the details, but I
Yeah.
do remember that there were many times where they'd be like, "Oh, I didn't know you needed that. Oh, I didn't know that happened." But
Yeah.
my favorite part was when the provider who hadn't been there showed up on day 3,
Hmm.
and we were walking him through the process, and he actually said, "Oh, I didn't know you guys were waiting for me."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And
Miscommunications and assumptions and
assumptions.
silos. Yeah.
Exactly. Complete siloed, and assumptions were made. And he ended up turning around. I do not take full credit for that. I know there were conversations happening in the background, but that comment of his in front of the nursing team and the techs was what was most important, because they heard it, so they could realize that it wasn't just this, OpEx person coming in and saying, Dr. So and so is on board. They heard him recognize it, and they were able to then meet him halfway as well. And it was great to see then the progressions as we went through the changes and talk about iterations. I remember we iterated a number of times. We came out of there with our plan, but as we put it into practice, oh, that wouldn't work, or this has to change, or what happened here, nobody got notified, we missed that, right? So it was making sure that all parties were talking. And I like to always build into my implementation plans that SA part, right? Like, how are we
Right.
going to check
Right.
and adjust?
Hmm.
If you have a board up, if you have your Gemba board or whatever you want to call it board up, what are the metrics that you're going to measure so
Mm-hmm.
that we can all again see if it's working and we can all together make those changes. And so I find those events one of the best ways of breaking down those silos, because you got everybody in the room and
Yeah.
inevitably somebody says, I didn't know you did that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah.
never been in one where that conversation hasn't
I
happened.
know.
And
I
I love
know.
that when it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. I mean, you're making me think of, I think, a similar situation where, procedures were starting on average roughly 40. The first procedure of the day was starting roughly 45 minutes late on average. And there was the blame game and the finger pointing and, well, the surgeon's not there. And the surgeon says, well, the instruments in anesthesia are never ready. So why should I show up on time? It's never said. And there,
Yep.
there was a lot of that happening. And we got that cross-functional team into a room, map out the timing and the swim lanes of the process. And when they draw the conclusion of the light bulb going off and saying, it sounds like a Demingism, right? This process is perfectly designed to start 45 minutes late.
Yep. Exactly.
And then they could go through that same process you described of what would we have to do to start on time. And, to be fair to all the people in healthcare, they were never given the opportunity
Right.
to step back. And when I say it was probably not accurate to say this process was perfectly designed to start 45 minutes late. This process was only capable of starting 45 minutes late. And then you find, the leverage points. So if you change a couple of things here and there, and then, the punchline to the story is, the team was really excited about running the process the first time, the first day, and they ran it and they were ready to go. Who wasn't there? The surgeon. But I'll tell you, once they demonstrated to the surgeon that all the
Yep.
other pieces are going to be in place, guess who started showing up on time? The surgeons,
Exactly.
right? So these
Exactly.
weren't bad people or lazy people or selfish people. They were happy to be part of a system that started on time.
Correct. Exactly. And if they don't think it's going to start on time, again, it's not like they're just lollygagging. They're
Yeah.
probably, at their desk answering emails or whatever, right? So why aren't they there? Because they don't expect it to start on time. So once
Yeah.
they see the process, they understand it. I mean, I've crossed that bridge many times.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to see it and you have to trust. And the way you build the trust is by having the conversations and breaking down those silos.
Yeah. The other thing that really resonates to me, I love the all three of those questions, but the risk assessment of like, can it be undone? And I think of an example. There was a hospital, a nurses station where, like one example might be like, it's going to date the story. We need to move the paper cutter from here to there. Like that's such a low effort, low risk
Yep.
move. Like what's the worst that could happen? We move it someplace else, we move it back, but then there were other issues around visibility and communication, and one of the proposals was like knocking down one of the walls.
Right.
So that sounds like a situation where harder to undo. I mean, you could, but you don't want to go back to leadership and say, well, I know we just spent money to knock it down, but we're going to iterate and
Right.
study and adjust, and please put the wall back up. You don't want to find yourself.
Yeah, and especially in a hospital setting with all the contagions, right?
Yeah.
All the dust.
Yeah.
No, it's exactly it. And so the question then becomes, okay, if we knock down the wall, right? Layouts are perfect ones. Especially as hospitals have changed over the years, right? We used to have very stark places. They've changed, they've opened things up. There's more circular, right? We have to change layouts sometimes. That is the right answer. It's going to make a difference on quality, on communication, on delivery, right? But before we do that, can we try something that helps us show that that's the answer, right? Is there something we can do in the meantime? Now that might be a little harder because it's hard to change a layout of a hospital or a clinic or something without making a lot of significant changes.
Yeah.
But what can you do? What can you do in the short term, right? And so that's the other question I always like to ask, because that's great. We know that's going to help, but that's also going to take 6 months. Or, my other one's favorite is IT, right? IT systems. We have to upgrade. Yes, we have to change something in Epic. Yep, that's going to take time. Is there anything we can do in the short term? Can we do something to the process or visually? Like I'm all about the visual management, right? I will talk that all the time. Like, what can we do in front of somebody to help them remember? Like, one of my favorites, you've probably experienced this back in the day, was with the nurses, right? Delivering the meds.
Hmm.
And it's changing off from the long term, but like, how do we protect the nurses from making med errors, right? Well, we can give
Right.
them, we can make sure they have it on their computer. They check everything off. They can't make a mistake. That's true. We can do that. But what can we do in the short term? What can we do that's more visual right now? And I think a lot of people went to the lanyards or went to a sign on the cart or something. They stood in a box. When they're in that box, you don't talk to them. When they have that hat on or that vest on,
Yeah.
you don't talk to them, right? Some very simple mechanism. Can it be undone? If it doesn't work, yeah, you can
Hmm.
try. Maybe the vest didn't. Maybe this lanyard wasn't enough. Maybe you need a vest. Maybe you need to put them in a box, right?
Yeah.
But what are the different iterations to help you? And that's where I love that Can It Be Undone? Because,
Mhm.
it makes people, again, think differently about, well, what could we do visually or short
Mhm.
term?
Yeah.
It's not healthcare, but I just have to share the story. So,
Yeah.
um, on the manufacturing floor, we had pallets, and some of the pallets were broken. So they had a pile of broken pallets next to the pile of good pallets. And I was on my Gemba walk, and I was like, what problem could happen here?
Hmm.
And I said, can you somehow make it more visual that these are bad? I know they look bad, but people come to work, and we went back to our nurses, right? People come to work to do a good job, right? Nobody wants to harm a patient.
Right.
Nobody wants to harm an employee with a bad palate. Oh no, we can't put a controlled document on that. I'm like, it doesn't have to be a controlled
Yeah.
document. Can you put a red cone on the bad pallets?
Mm-mm.
Like,
Hmm.
just, well, they should know. They know that they're supposed to check before they take it.
Dangerous
Fantastic.
assumption. Yeah.
Fantastic. How many things are going on in their personal lives right now and in the
Hmm.
world today that is causing them not to think about the pallets at this very
Right.
moment? Does that make them a bad person? No. For the nurse that gives the wrong med, does that make them? No. They just, something distracted them. So how do you build those, again, the systems visually? What visuals can you use to slow somebody down just enough to pause
Hmm.
before, right?
Yeah.
Set that system up so they can't make that mistake, right? I'm sure you've said that many times in your
Yeah.
career,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't have, that's why that can it be undone question is so important. It's like, it doesn't have to, you don't have to knock down a wall. You don't have to change the IT
Hmm.
system. There's a lot of things we can do to people, again, and that shows respect, right? It goes
Yes.
back to that respect. When we build the system in them to help them slow down and help them not make the mistake,
Hmm.
it tells us, we know there's other things going on in your life besides this job.
Yeah.
And you are human. We want to
Hmm.
help you be successful.
I think
So
that's
yeah,
part of the core of respect for people. And
exactly.
respect, there's some who prefer the translation as from Japanese into respect for humanity. And all those things you described are part of being human. We get tired, we get distracted, we sometimes aren't feeling well or have a bad day or we have stresses. And I think that's where mistake proofing, checklists, things like that are systems that, like that you said, protect the worker from being involved in an incident and then, God forbid, being blamed for that incident. I mean, I always remember pretty vividly some words the surgeon Dr. Atul Gawande used around, in his book, The Checklist Manifesto, of saying, the checklists are there to protect a surgeon with a perfect career-long track record from having a bad day and performing a wrong site surgery. It's there to protect the patient, but it's in alignment to protect the surgeon, because now you've got a connection between safety and the quality of outcomes and a
Mm-hmm.
cost or financial impact of having a lawsuit, a settlement, or any of that. It's all connected.
100% connected. That's why uh, those 5 metrics or 4 metrics, some people put people in with safety.
Mhm.
Yeah, those can be so easily siloed as well. We have to just focus on quality,
Yeah.
right? And
It-
in back when I was doing process improvement, my job was to reduce costs, and our quality improvement team improved quality. We all
yeah.
used the same tools, and we tried to work together. But you can't silo the metrics either, because
Yeah.
not everything that we needed to do was going to reduce costs. But by improving quality, it actually did reduce your costs, right? By
Yeah.
improving the delivery, it reduces your cost. And so
Mhm.
you can't silo those metrics either, because they are
Right.
completely
Yeah.
interrelated. And so that's one of the hardest things for me, is when you, and especially in this day and age where all companies are so focused on cutting, and they always have been cutting costs,
Hmm.
cutting costs. At the end of the day, by treating your people with respect, setting up your systems so they can't make mistakes,
Hmm.
guess what? You're actually going to save yourselves money.
Yeah.
Maybe not tomorrow, but
Yeah.
3 months
And
from
with those letters, it doesn't spell anything. It's not a good mnemonic. I've learned it
now.
30 years ago in the auto industry as SQDC,
Mm-hmm.
quality delivery costs. That's why I got
Yep.
tripped up earlier. But for you to say financials is actually, I think, more all encompassing, because I've been involved in healthcare projects that interconnectedly were improving the quality of care, the delivery and flow, right? So preventing delays is leading to better outcomes, and being able to increase capacity to
Mm-hmm.
be able to do, for example, more MRI scans per day. You're losing fewer referrals because the waiting times used to be really long and now they're short. And that financial impact of being able to take care of more patients is, I think, perfectly aligned with, employees want to provide care. I think they'd rather be doing value added work in a well designed system that's not stressful than it is just sitting there with nothing to do. I think in a
Yep.
in a dysfunctional environment, people are happy to sit there and do nothing. But look, I'd say that's not a criticism of them. That's a reflection of the system. But when you've got aligned teams and strong mission and purpose, and you have that in healthcare and some other settings, the day goes by more quickly when
Yep.
you're doing the work you were trained to do and want to do. And so it's hard to disconnect a lot of that. This is interconnected benefit. And I agree. I've seen organizations that have the process improvement team and the patient safety team, and they might report up to the same person, but they're siloed, and they each
Yep.
have kind of their own flavor of root cause analysis. And I tend to look at it like, well, a problem is a problem. we should
Yep.
we could be using the same language. We could be a little bit more cross functional, and getting people, and not silo people off, because I think, even if you're an engineer, I have my bias as being an engineer with a non-clinical background. I think we have a role to play in kind of more clinical safety and quality related problem solving. Doesn't mean we're going to solve it for them or have the answers, but I wouldn't say we're ineligible to work on that.
No. Not I'm kind of hesitating, because I don't have a clinical background either. I went
Sure.
into healthcare administration coming out of an econ math double major in college. So,
Yeah.
and it is. I remember thinking back that we actually trained our quality improvement team. They did use our same tools. They did use the same root cause analysis. So we were able to align with them
Mhm.
on trying to work together. But it was kind of, I think I was set up to fail on that one on some
Mhm.
degrees. But we did train. We ended up training the entire leadership team in our operating system thinking, and I still have people reach out to me today and say, hey, thanks for helping us,
Yeah.
and we're still using those now.
Yeah.
You had mentioned, going back to the financial piece. So I was working with a primary care clinic recently, and one of the things I was helping them with was trying to just establish some sort of a model line using a primary care. And we looked at, I was watching their work, and I was talking to them about eliminating waste and simple things of searching for material, or walking back and forth.
Mhm.
Right, going back to that, and what are the roles and responsibilities of everybody? Is everybody doing what they're, unutilized talent, right? Are they working to the level of their license and their skill? And we had one provider who was at I think it was a 70% slot utilization.
Mhm.
And by just changing what people were doing, and getting more moving around who was doing what, the nurse took on some more responsibilities off the MAs, the front desk took on some things. We were actually able then to fill up those slots, because there was less of that of him having to spend time doing all of the reports that he was doing, all this stuff, because we just were able to look at what was he doing, what were other people doing. And that's where some of that waste comes down to too, is right, that underutilized talent. Are we working to our licensure, or are we doing things that we shouldn't be doing because somebody else can do it? And so, yeah, so by changing that, that actually increased their revenue significantly too. So I just wanted to go back to that because I feel like it's so important to think about how are we using our quality and our delivery to drive our financials or our costs. I always like to think about it. It's maybe not budget. You're not going to see it in your budget. You're going to see it in that revenue side. You're going to be able to do more with the same amount of people. And that's what we're all working for anyway, right? Again, keeping people's jobs, respect for people.
Yeah. I want to ask you to, compare and contrast a little bit. And I'm not setting this up and framing it as, one of these, arguments across methodologies or which is best, but my roots and my bias, I always state them, is around lean. I started auto industry, very Toyota based methodologies. I use statistics, and, we can fold that in. And then, we know there is, Six Sigma, which we don't talk about a lot on this podcast because that, again, that's not where I come from. I'm not anti Six Sigma. And then we have Lean Six Sigma. And you've been around, all of these. How would you compare those experiences or see things fitting together in your experiences, or the way you would want to see it?
Yeah. So I'm with you. I'm Toyota Production System, Lean. That's what I was taught when I started learning about process improvement.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I changed the name of the titles of everybody from process improvement to lean because I want people to be thinking about that. But when there was one place I worked, I had a director who helped me see the difference, because I was struggling with what's lean, what's Six Sigma, what's Lean Six Sigma, and the way she had set up the structure was the Six Sigma team. There was a Six Sigma team. They were green and black belts. They were focused on improving the actual quality of the product. So reducing that variation, reducing the variation and any defects in the product. She would talk about it as being the value added part of the process. Like, what's the science behind it, right? That's where Six Sigma works best, right? With your statistical process controls, all of that, focusing in on moving to that, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, reducing variation, reducing defects. I mean, there are rigorous methodologies that can be helpful.
Right. And then lean was more the people process, right? It's eliminating variation in the process, but for the work that the people are doing, and looking at simplifying it by saying just elimination of waste. But that's not what lean is all about, right? To me, lean is the whole picture, right? The continuous improvement. One of my favorite books is Toyota Way, and Jeff Leichert's 14 Principles, right? There's more to it than elimination of waste. But in the way she chained it, and the way we were set up was, as a lean team, we were out there doing the rapid improvement events and helping to drive, going back to our previous conversation, focus on quality, and we're going to get delivery, and we're going to get cost savings. Focus on making sure we have one piece flow and the product is safe, and we're going to get better capacity, more capacity. And that was such an aha moment for me to learn that. And I've carried that with me from there. Like, really, we are talking about one piece flow, deliver without defects, right? Reduce variation, but in a process mentality. And that Six Sigma can focus on the value added science part of the product. And it makes sense to me. And that's how I live my life. So, Lean Six Sigma to me is I still struggle with what that means. It's almost like we're trying to take two things that have a really powerful, and we're trying to do it the same way. It's like having, a general contractor. To me, Lean Six Sigma is almost the general contractor. Or you could have a specialized plumber and a specialized construction person focusing on their own things. Stronger, you get more from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best example I worked at was a manufacturing company where Lean and Six Sigma coexisted. I forget where I heard this from originally. I wish I could give credit where credit's due, but I haven't said this in a long time, but it just jumped back to me now. When you can put a cat and a poodle in a room together, and they might very well coexist, but it doesn't mean they become this animal called a catoodle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
Exactly. Exactly. And even in healthcare, to me, I think lean is so powerful in healthcare
Mhm.
because it's all about people processes, right? You're never going to have somebody use lean and tell a surgeon how they should cut,
You
or
should.
an
I'd hope not. I'd hope not.
anesthesiologist or an anesthesiologist and how much medicine you should be giving during anesthesia, right? That's a Six Sigma level thing, right? But everything else in the healthcare system is all about people process.
Mm-hmm.
And lean is exactly the right tool for in methodology. I don't want to use the word tool. Can you edit that out?
No.
Lean is not a
High
tool.
level, capital
One of my
T tool, right?
one of my pet peeves. Yeah,
Oh.
exactly. Methodology, but lean thinking is what we need in healthcare because the Six Sigma, like, where does variation, that level of complexity needed? Can you use it? Yes. But
Yeah.
for most of the stuff in healthcare to help us reduce the cost of healthcare, there's a lot of waste, as we all know. So
there is, and I agree with you. And waste reduction is important, but that's not the only thing. And thank you for saying and putting together lean and variation reduction, because my pet peeve is when people sort of suggest or imply or state directly that variations of like, well, lean is about speed and Six Sigma is about reducing variation. I'm like, well, we could both methodologies can contribute to them because they're interconnected.
absolutely.
I mean, like standardized work and other lean methods. I mean, certainly we are trying to drive out variation. And my view is that there are some really sticky, complicated problems that are worth that more rigorous approach. But at that one company where the two coexisted, I saw the one version of the mistake of sometimes the Six Sigma approach seemed like overkill, to certain problems.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. But it's I just lost my train of thought.
That's also part of being human.
Thank you. Anyway, variation, going back to the variation, right? I see it more from a lean perspective, going to the standards, right? When we have standard work, if we're not following the standards, that's going to create variation in how long things take to get done, the quality of things, right? So you can't say that's a Six Sigma problem because it's actually a standard work problem, or it's why have we not set the process up so everybody's following it the same way, right? So it does coexist. I mean, variation has to be part of reducing variation has to be part of lean.
Yeah. So, Anne, maybe one last question here, and I think it's a meaty question, I think perhaps. But what are some of your reflections, of working in different industries, and common principles or things that you've learned in one that are transferable back into the other or others.
Oh, wow! I think it's all transferable. I mean, for me, you were talking about. When you asked that question, you're talking about like lean work, right?
Yeah, lean work, and maybe to frame it a little bit differently for you. You started in healthcare and then have also done work in manufacturing, right?
Yes.
So that I think that's unusual, because it's more likely the manufacturing roots people end up in healthcare and then maybe back in manufacturing. But so let me frame the question a different way of like, what were some of the challenges or the things that you noticed then going to work in manufacturing, where you're like, oh, well, these things are transferable, but you're kind of going in an unusual direction?
Yeah, I think to me the biggest difference I found, and this is going to sound, I don't know if it's going to come across like, there is, I talked about my quality improvement team in healthcare, right? So maybe it's because I wasn't ingrained in the quality side at the healthcare. I know there's a lot of standards and controlled documents and all of that around in healthcare. So
the traditional clinical quality.
Correct. Clinical
area,
quality.
right?
I wasn't right. I didn't work with that. So part of this might just be my exposure. So I don't want anybody listening to this to think there's not quality. Yes, there's 100% quality in healthcare. But what I found in maybe it was the site I was at recently, is that there's so much controlled document. And I guess I found this elsewhere too, because anyway, I could go off a couple rabbit holes on this one. The documentation required at the manufacturing sites that I've worked at, which felt like it hindered improvement. So going back to my, Lean and Six Sigma, how much information are you putting in your standard work, in your controlled documents? If your work instructions or your standard work is like every single little step is in there, and somebody can't look to the right because the standard work said to look to the left, and they're going to get written up for that or dinged on that. That's the constraints I have felt in the manufacturing setting. I didn't get that in healthcare, and maybe it's also how things are documented and written up. But in manufacturing, it feels like because of the environments I've been in, very regulated environments in the manufacturing sites I've been in, that things have to have been, I's have had to be dotted and T's have to be crossed. But I think in some cases they went too far and they put too much into those documents because they wanted to make sure everybody did it the same way. Again, going back to our systems, if your systems in place are strong enough, you don't need to have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed. In one of the projects I did in one of the manufacturing sites I was in, we actually looked at a work instruction. We pulled it. There was like 140 blanks that had to be filled out, 26 pages. We worked to reduce that by half. But I brought in regulatory and quality and I said, do they need to have this? And some of these, do they need these? They said, no, those were put in place because somebody made a mistake 20 years ago and they put it into the work instruction.
Yeah.
And as long as the system's in place so it doesn't happen, it doesn't have to be there. And I don't know. And to me, that was the biggest difference for me is afraid of making a mistake or causing a problem because it's not on paper. That's what I've found when I've gone into manufacturing from when I left healthcare. And maybe healthcare, where I was at 12 years ago, we didn't have a lot documented.
Well, but that's
my perspective.
I think what you're describing, there could be, two different extremes. So one is, kind of, I've heard people use the word like, there's enabling bureaucracy and then there's stifling bureaucracy.
Yes.
So we could take the documentation too far and it becomes an unnecessary barrier, or people hold it up as an excuse. We can't change because of this quality system or this documentation or ISO or whatever. I've heard some of that in healthcare where people say, well, we can't change. Why? Because, we're working in the blood bank and the, what's the acronym, AABB, or, like some professional organization or regulation says we can't do it that way, which is sometimes true and sometimes not.
Yeah, that's true. I did hear that when I was in the healthcare from our laboratory manager.
Yeah.
There was a lot of, we can't do it because of the lab organization says no.
And so you have to gently, and I've found like working, usually it's somebody who is one of those professionals that can push back on the professional question, where I would feel like it was risky to do so as an engineer. But then there also is in healthcare, shocking to me, like very much in a lot of settings, a tradition of, well, I do it the way I want. I do it the way I was taught. I do it the way that works for me. Lack of standard work to an extreme that either leads to problems in any of those categories. It could lead to safety, quality, delivery, cost problems. So finding the right balance.
And I've seen that in manufacturing too. I mean, even despite all of those work instructions, there's still areas that didn't have it.
Yeah.
And people were doing it their own way. Or I was trained by Joe and you were trained by Mary and Joe and Mary did it different, right? And I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it Anne's way.
Yeah. But these are the things where, the principles, whether it's, Jeff Liker's Toyota Way 14 principles or Dr. Deming's different 14 points, or, the 5 principles of, the book Lean Thinking. Like those principles are often straightforward, but now working with them in the real world, That's where we earn our paycheck, because otherwise you
Right.
could just mimeograph the 14 or the 5 and it would be easy. But
Wouldn't that
it's
be
not.
great?
Well, talk about protecting people's jobs.
That's
We want to be able to. I mean, look, I wish things were perfect and you didn't need improvement professionals. But again, part of the human condition, the organizational condition, is things are never perfect. Look, even at Toyota, Toyota's
right.
not perfect. They still have problems. They still have waste. They still have people working on Kaizen and improvement. So
They're still learning.
hopefully we all are. So,
Right.
I think with that, we'll wrap up again. We're joined by Anne Frewin. I will link you in the show notes to your LinkedIn profile if people want to connect with you or reach out. And
Thank you.
an hour went by very quickly here. So thank you for having a great conversation. Thank you for sharing some of your experiences and passions here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.